To Alabama in the United States now, and some listeners may find this next story distressing. Alabama's governor has announced a moratorium of executions in the state and requested a, I quote, top-to-bottom review of the state's capital punishment system after 2 failed attempts at lethal injections. Well, Lee Hedgepeth is an investigative reporter at CBS Network in Birmingham, Alabama, and he's covering this story. Thank you for your time, Lee.
Good to be with you.
Just give us a bit of context surrounding this story.
So the state's governor has asked for the state's attorney general to stop seeking death warrants from Alabama's highest court. As you said, she's asked for a top-to-bottom review of the execution process. And this comes after 3 executions where officials who were conducting the execution had difficulty accessing the veins of the death row inmates. 2 of those executions were called off and 1 was successful.
Is there a sense of why these injections have not been working?
You know, there's really not. In Alabama, there's been a lot of secrecy around the protocol for lethal injections in the state. And, after each one of these executions, state prison officials have press conferences and really don't answer many questions about what went wrong in this process. We get autopsy reports afterwards, and so that's shed some light into these situations, but it seems that Alabama has just had difficulty accessing the veins, and we know very little about the folks who were actually in the execution chamber. For example, we don't know the identities of those who are in the execution chamber or what their medical qualifications may be.
From those reports, though, Lee, is there a sense of what happens to the body when the lethal injection doesn't work? Not just on the body, but on the mind as well. That sense of thinking you're going in to die, only to then live.
That's right. Kenny Smith, who the state attempted to execute on Thursday, he was in the execution chamber for about an hour with, these officials trying to access his veins for about an hour, poking and prodding his body. A day before, a federal appeals court had heard a case regarding Kenny Smith's execution where he had argued that, this type of prodding of him with needles repeatedly to try to gain vein access would violate the U.S. Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. But the day of the attempted execution, the U.S. Supreme Court denied that claim with 3 justices, saying that they would have allowed that stay to move forward.
It sounds shocking on so many levels there. You are the media witness of the process. What does that mean, and what does that involve?
So in Alabama, a few reporters are allowed to witness the execution, and so that process essentially involves going down to the state's death row, which is located in the southern part of Alabama, once the execution proceeds, we go to a witness room, a curtain is drawn back, and several of the media witnesses are allowed to witness the lethal injection of the inmate.
Wow, okay. In terms of going forward and next steps, what does happen next?
So again, KIV has called for this review. A lot of advocacy organizations here in the state, as well as the Nonpartisan Death Penalty Information Center, have said that this review should be conducted by an outside agency, that the Alabama Department of Corrections, has a history of not answering questions and being transparent about the execution process. So the state is expected to have the Department of Corrections conduct this review, but these outside, advocacy groups are asking that an independent investigator takes over the case. So we'll see what will move forward. But as of right now, no executions will take place in Alabama until this review is completed.
Okay. Taking a step back as well, I mean, capital punishment is a legal penalty in 27 states, but only 20 states have the ability to execute death sentences. I mean, has what has happened there in Alabama, has it reopened a debate about the ethics of the death penalty at all?
Yeah, I think so. Particularly these kind of unprecedented botched executions in Alabama have kind of brought national attention. There was a story that was published in the Atlantic magazine here, and that story kind of brought national attention to this issue. So we've seen renewed focus on this, particularly as the Trump administration was going out of office. There were a lot of federal executions that also brought light to this. So there's been a lot of pressure on President Biden to commute federal death row sentences, which is a separate issue, but kind of related And all of these executions obviously bring attention to executions, not just here in Alabama, but also in the federal system.
Really helpful to have you on. Thank you so much. That is Lee Hedgepeth, an investigative reporter at CBS in Birmingham, Alabama. Thank you.